How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I have got a very special guest for you all. Today, I'm joined by a strength coach with the Keto Strength Society. Today, I am joined by the one and only Pauric O'Rourke. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you keeping, Stephen?
Just about getting used to the heat. I think
Yeah.
it's over a month now in Thailand. So yeah, I'm getting sunburnt a little bit less, which is good.
Well, if it's any comfort, I'm coming up in 4 years in Florida, and I'm still not used to the heat. So it takes a
Go-
while.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. I suppose the first question is, how are you? What's kind of been happening in your world recently?
Yeah, no, I'm good. Our world recently, this year we restructured our education system completely to be all 2 day courses. So the courses started off originally, they're 5 day long courses, and now we've condensed everything down to 2 days just to make it more feasible for people to come in and do them. But it's so that there was the start of the year was making sure we had the biggest return on investment for people and structured the courses as well as possible to fit all the information in 2 days. And then it's been then delivering them on a consistent basis. And now now that that's all actually finished built out, we're now building out a continuous education subscription. So there's going to be like a monthly recurring subscription that we're doing webinars and having a forum and stuff like that there. So it's all behind the scenes stuff that people don't really think goes on, but seems to be a lot of it.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you find, because I know, like for myself, the presenting side of things, speaking to people in person and actually
Mhm.
delivering the courses and the content is kind of the tip of the iceberg, if you like, but maybe the enjoyable stuff. How have you found, like what you've said there, bulking out everything behind the scenes as well? How have you kind of found that
Yeah.
balance? Do you enjoy both, or how have you got on with that?
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. It's because it's really, really easy to have a good idea. It's really, really hard to then have that in a very presentable format that people are going to understand. So
Yeah,
just having a concept that you want to deliver to people is like 10% of what you need to then do to get that point across in a learnable format that is then repeatable, because there's no point being able to get it across for one class and then the next class you have is completely different. So it's a definitely an interesting side of things. It's not what I thought it would be, a little easier than that. That was probably the hardest thing, is to make sure it's a very repeatable, systematic process that everyone can grasp. Whereas you just think, oh, it's a really good idea. Of course I can do that.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
hard.
Yeah, I like to ask that because, especially as my role back in the UK changed to more of a kind of like coach development role.
Hmm.
It's kind of that thing of I found myself, and this might be a massive tangent, but I found myself like what you say, saying the same thing but different to different coaches,
Yeah.
whereas actually you want the same message and you want to say it similar so then it sinks in, it can go. Don't get me wrong, because of sometimes some of the coaches just didn't understand how I was saying it, so I
Mhm.
adapted it. But I think that's really important, of having that consistent message so that
Yeah.
everybody then is on the same page.
Yeah, it's one of the huge parts of in-person learn versus online learn, because at least in person you can react to the people in front of you and say, okay, I know they didn't understand that message. I can say it in a different way that they're going to then understand. Whereas online, you're just trying to deliver the message in as systematic a format as possible that is going to be broad reaching, but it still mightn't hit home for everyone. But that's the one nuance between in person and online that makes the in person more favorable, that you can really
Yeah.
look into someone's eyes and say, all right, you didn't get that. Let me redo it. Really make sure you get the information we're trying to convey.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I know I did quite a brief introduction there, and we've spoken
Mhm.
about the courses, obviously being in Florida for 4 years. For
Mhm.
everyone listening who might not know your background in training, in coaching, heading over to Florida, just want
Yeah.
to give a little bit of a background to yourself.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I had my own gym facility in Ireland that I opened up in about 2014, and I ran it right through the 2022. The gym was probably 50-50 Gen Pop the athlete. That was very much my choice because I made sure to set up the payments to allow for more athletes than Gen Pop. So to try and encourage to get the athletic population in because that's how I want it to work. So it was very team based when it came to athletes. So they're all getting in at a good rate and stuff like that. But I would have trained people from 14 right up until the end of their career. It was mostly Gaelic football, which I'm sure no one has a clue what that is. But it's
I,
like
I,
Irish national sport.
Actually, again, you'll probably find out I'm a big fan of a tangent. So, me and my partner, we're actually getting married. So her
Oh, very
family
good.
is Irish, and
Yes.
when we were driving, so we're getting. I'm not sure where in Ireland you're from, but we're getting married in Wicklow.
Yep.
And when we were driving through, I've never seen so many towns have
Yeah.
Gaelic football at their own stadiums. So
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
I can't actually get it sent to me. But there's a team called Orkram, which is where
Mhm.
close to where we're getting married, and
Yeah.
they play their shirt is the coolest shirt I've ever seen, and I and I, and
Very
I, and
good.
I want one. But yes, I don't understand the rules, but
Uh,
yeah, I'm getting to grips with Gaelic football.
yeah. Very good. No, it's a very enjoyable sport to play. It's a very enjoyable sport to coach as well. But that was mostly the population I worked with for athletes. Then there was some handball, not Olympic handball, as a GAA style handball, which is on like a squash court. Downhill mountain biking, a couple of rugby, a couple of soccer. So I had bits and pieces everywhere. And then just the general gen pop. But then on an educational side of things, I did my first like major continuous education uh, in 2014 with the Polican group, and that is when I met the rest of the Kilo crew. So
Yeah.
Stefan was teaching the course, Alex was in the background, Kelsey was in the background. So I met them all back in 2014. Before that, I'd only done UK SCA stuff. Then went back every year until 2016 was my last year there. And then 2017, Kilo had opened and I did more continuous education with Kilo at that stage, right through until 2019. And then at that stage, they reached out, offered me the job. And visa processes aren't quick, so it took to 2022 between the pandemic and the rest of life for that all to
Yeah.
come together.
Nice. And with that, you spoke about there about your own education as a coach, if you like. Was it something in terms of you delivering education that was something that you wanted to do? Was it a natural progression, or was it kind of just all these opportunities were coming up, and it was kind of like, oh yeah, I'll give this a go.
Honestly, it was just the opportunity presented itself. I never really got into coaching thinking I was going to get into the educational side of things. Technically, when I was offered the job with Kilo, they still had a physical gym running. So it was going to be some coaching. It just the business plan changed over the course of the pandemic. So it went to 100% education, which is fine. But yeah, so it was never a goal to 100% to get into education, but
Yeah.
it's a very nice change and it's a very different outlook. And I get to spend far more time digging into research than I ever would have as a coach because I'm not trying to be on the gym floor for 30 hours a week.
Yeah, 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 definitely. And as well, I think it's interesting to, especially with speaking to maybe newer coaches or coaches wanting to increase their knowledge, just to help kind of, I don't know if a give back is the right word, but just help the improvement and raising the standard of coaching. Just because I think sometimes people can get the qualifications or go in and
Mhm.
because there's so much information out there, kind of
Mhm.
go down a little bit of a rabbit hole that isn't necessarily the most optimal. I would maybe say.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like the big part of our education is we try to make sure everything is 100% applicable. So you'll go, you'll do a course, and then you'll walk into the gym the next day and be able to apply everything from that course. And that's always been one of the huge limitations I find in a lot of the continuous education is it could be great information and very well backed and researched, but they never teach you the specific application. Like
Yeah,
for the UK SCA stuff, like all the information you got was fantastic, but you walked out of it and you didn't have any better idea of how to write a program or how to
yeah.
periodize. Like you've like, oh, I snatched and clean and jerked all day, or did my A skips and B skips all day, but I didn't actually learn the program of it. I didn't learn the application of it. So that's
Yeah.
one thing we really try and like push to the forefront of our education is the how to apply this information straight away.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I remember one of the so he had a degree in strength and conditioning. One of the coaches
Hmm.
who I helped with kind of his development back in the UK. He had loads and loads of knowledge, but just didn't know exactly like what you said. Just didn't know how to implement it um, in a gym environment. He could give the answer, but in terms of actually
Yeah.
delivering it, it was just a little bit clunky
Hmm.
in terms of how it was. So yeah, I think that being able to apply it is absolutely key, or else you've got all this information, a little bit like when we were talking about getting that repeatable message
Yeah.
out. It's no good having that information if you can't then relay it in terms that people can understand, or you can actually put all those things in place.
Yeah. And I think it's also really important that just getting information is and applicable information, it's great. And just going out and applying information, even if you don't understand it, okay, you'll still get results. But if you really want to bring the results to the next level, you have to be able to go on that beyond that information and know the core underlying principles that it's built off. So that's when
Yeah.
the real scientific backing of it really does help. So the people who have that degree in strength and conditioning and they can go and they can quote Zach Skiorsky and Verkhoshansky, and they know all the old school guys who've created all the literature over the last 60 years. That's the ones who can then look at a system, break down why the system works, and then manipulate the system to suit their needs. And for me, that's huge. That's how you really differentiate top class coaches, the ones that can look at the system and take what's really useful from it and then manipulate it into things that they need.
Yeah, definitely. And then that kind of goes into obviously I sent over some topics prior to chatting today, and a little bit similar to like what you mentioned about the gym that you set up in Ireland, 50% Gen Pop and then athlete as well,
Mhm.
is as coaches, or even just gym goers and athletes that are interested in training, in terms of the lifespan of somebody just starting out in the gym,
Mhm.
whatever age that may be, developing all the way through to advanced, and knowing those, because there's so much information out there. There's podcasts like this. You can Google things. I'm sure AI, which is huge at the minute, can
Yeah.
put some stuff together. What is the difference when it comes between, you've got a beginner coming in and his training, whether it be for Gen Pop or because there's some athletes that haven't really done much gym. They've only done the sport before, delivering it through to somebody who is like trained for years. Lots of sessions underneath the belt. What's kind of the difference, and how do you kind of plan that journey, if you like?
Yeah. So for me, the answer for the athlete coming in for the first time and the Gen Pop is slightly different because and I say that assuming the athlete's coming in at a youth athlete age, so like under 16, so 14, 15, 16. And at that stage, we generally just want to be very complementary in their development and concurrently sort of somewhat develop everything because there's such a low threshold of training age that you can give them a very small bit of lots of different training qualities and they'll just improve everything at once. They're going to be a sponge. They're just going to absorb everything. And it isn't as like you'll have a long runway, you have a year or two where they'll just absorb everything. It's not like they're dedicating 4 or 5 nights a week in the gym. They're going to be then once, they're going to be in twice a week if you're lucky, because they're playing their sports and they're probably playing multiple sports, or they should be playing multiple sports at that stage. Whereas for the Gen Pop, first time they're coming in, generally you'll find that's going to be more at that 18 to 26. It could be older, but it's normally beyond that youth athlete stage that it happens. And for them, what I find is the most important thing is improving their movement competency. So for that, we're going to do the absolute opposite. And we're going to very, very, very repetitive sessions. So they're going to learn intramuscular coordination. So they're going to really upskill themselves in their movement patterns as quickly as possible. And since of such a low, like zero training age, they're never going to be working near RMs because their RMs are 100% dictated by their movement quality. So each rep is going to look different. So until they've got to a level that there's some level of cohesion and similarity from rep to rep to rep, it's going to be a technical failure side of things much before muscular failure. So what at that stage I am going to prescribe very similar sessions. So like if they're training 3 days a week, which is probably a realistic starting point for those novices, I'm going to do three full body sessions, and they're probably just going to repeat 3 days in a row. Just so probably do it for 3 weeks of 9 sessions, the exact same thing. They get really, really good at it. You somewhat increase loads throughout, and then you will somewhat modify the session, but it'll be a very small modification. It could either just be a modification in change of reps, change of load, or slight increase in complexity of the exercise selection. Like it's not going to be anything groundbreaking. It should be basic because the basics is going to help them increase and improve the fastest. Whereas the advanced is the complete opposite end of the spectrum. They're at some point you get to be a movement expert. So you can go in and you mightn't have squatted for 6 months, but that first time you go in the squat is going to look like it did 6 months ago. It's maybe not going to feel as nice, but it's going to look pretty damn good.
Yeah.
So at that stage, variety is going to be your best friend. And that could be variety in exercise selection. It could be variety in intensities and volume to try and keep developing more and more intramuscular coordination without putting too much stress on the musculature and the central nervous system to be beat down really quickly within the training plan. So I'm
Yeah.
sure we can get into far more details on both ends of the spectrum, depending which way you want to go.
Yeah, definitely. I think having that as kind of the base, if you like, of look, this is where if it's a beginner, a novice, all the way up to advanced, just in terms of a little bit like what you touched on earlier, the principles that you would kind of
Hmm.
go into for a session. One thing that I wanted to touch on is with people's starting point when they come in, some, and you might have seen this as well. I know I've seen this, is that some beginners, you give them the program pretty similar, not too much variation, because they just want to learn those movements, and they're starting to build up a little bit of strength, and depending on the person, they could end up putting a little bit more weight on the bar, just so it's feeling challenging. Do you
Hmm.
think, probably from a client's point of view, but also a coach's point of view, do you think sometimes, especially working with beginners and in terms of progressing, and when we're looking at quality and movement, if all of a sudden they're saying, "Oh, this is really easy. Okay, cool. Let's put a little bit of weight on the bar," it's kind of like jumping the gun a little bit and thinking, oh, well, they've got a great bit of strength, so now actually we can do this, this, and this, rather than kind of just pumping the brakes a little bit, just to be like, look, let's just stay around here for a little bit. Let's see how you get on, rather than just going that. Because sometimes I've seen it before, whereas it just goes up, the weight goes up just a little bit, then all of a sudden technique breaks down. Risk of injury increases, and then all of a sudden that enjoyment of the sessions, which I think plays a big part in that consistency from beginner
Mhm.
to advanced, kind of drops off a little bit. What's kind of your thoughts on that, or your approach?
Yeah, so generally, you, it's somewhat the coach's eye in terms of you can sometimes see people, like, I know if I put 5 more kilos in that bar, it's going to look like shit. But if that's what you want to be happy, I still won't do it. If I know it's going to cause that automatic breakdown. But for those, what a really good plan that I've used a lot in my past is increased density.
Yeah,
So, because like a really good thing for those beginners is to put a weight that they find somewhat challenging, but they can always maintain really good form with, and do it for sub-maximal reps. So I'm talking like 6 reps and something they probably could grind 10 or 12 out with, but like we're going sub-maximal. And then we just increase the density within the session. So they're going to get more total work done and they're not going to feel like they're not making progress by not putting weight in the bar because you're just giving them a completely different goal. You're saying, all
yeah.
right, so last week we did 4 sets of 6 here within our 15-minute time allotment. All right, this time we're going to go for staying with the 15 minutes. We're going to bump it up another set and like just play with density. All of a sudden they're getting great intramuscular coordination work, great technique work without ever thinking that no extra weight has went on the bar. So
Yeah.
they're getting a really good training effect without that ego being taken over and just thinking the only goal in a training session is more weight, more load in the bar. Which, if you play that game, it's going to be a very short game.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of I can't remember who I was chatting to, but it was yeah, if the weight on the bar was going up all the time, everyone would be lifting 500
Yeah.
kilos all the time, and it would be dead easy. And
Yep.
yeah, I'd be out of the job very very quickly if it was
Yeah.
that easy. On the
Exactly.
on the flip side of that, so you've mentioned there about using training protocols to pump the brakes a little bit, give them a different challenge rather than more weight on the bar. Does the same thought process apply when you're working with an advanced client or athlete? Because on the flip side of that, it might be a case of managing their recovery, or they might have a more specific goal of speaking from a powerlifting background, it might be a case of, look, we're going to focus on your deadlift. If it's an athlete, it might be a case of, actually, you've got a couple of games coming up over the next couple of weeks, depending on where they are in the season. Does your thought process stay the same, but just trying to focus on different ways of managing that athlete or client?
Yeah, so it would definitely be a different thought process. Well, similar in terms of I'm gonna give them a different goal to work towards instead of thinking about low, but it's gonna be achieved in a different way. So like for the advanced athlete, one thing I use a lot is just choosing less loadable exercises. So say you're in your program, you want a hip hinge, but they're already deadlifting that set in that week. They're already squatting that week. They're going to be doing a lot, but instead of just programming an RDL or a good morning for their hip hinge, you can choose a less loadable exercise, but still trains the hip hinge pattern. So we could choose like a B stance RDL with contralateral or ipsilateral dumbbell. So automatically your load potential there is going to be about 50% of what you can with it's less than 50% really of a bilateral RDL. So that automatically it's going to deload that portion of the session. So you're going to be favoring recovery. You can go with like something as simple as a unilateral incline back extension. Like it's really hard to load up a unilateral incline back extension. So, but you're still going to get the objective of training, giving additional volume to those hip extensors.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that there's the way I'll manipulate exercise selection for the more advanced. But then it could even be, so say For more advanced people, I run them on a 14-day rotation a lot more often. So they'll only repeat the same training session every 14 days. And one, so obviously we can prescribe just straight up percentages and reps associated. So you know they're training with a lot of reps in reserve. You can also then, for your bigger exercises, just choose less loadable exercises as well. So
Yeah,
instead of a deadlift, it could be a deficit deadlift. It's still brutal. It's still really hard, but it's not going to be as neurally draining as the most efficient motor pattern that you've been training all your life of a normal deadlift. You're still not going to
yeah.
have the same level of efficiency in that deficit deadlift, so it's going to reduce the load more so than just the additional range of motion.
Yeah, I think the going back to what you mentioned about more advanced clients and athletes is variety is your best friend there. You know, your
Yeah.
toolbox all of a sudden has got a little bit bigger.
Mhm.
Just because sometimes I don't think it's so much thinking outside the box, but just thinking about all right, cool, so this is where we're at. How can I work back from there to manage that load a
Yeah.
little bit? One thing, because this is something that you know we've spoken there, the differences between the two, but in terms of actually and you've mentioned, you've had clients that you've worked with for a long time. As someone is progressing through that and becoming more advanced, I know people usually ask about what's the time frame for that. You can say like how long's a piece of string. I think just
Yeah.
focusing on just seeing that person change, adapt, whether it be in strength, speed, or anything like that. What what's the biggest thing that is going to separate that? Is it execution of movement, their skill, the movement quality? Is it actually weight on the bar? What kind of characteristics are you looking for that's going to allow them to progress and think, do you know what, actually in my head, it's like unlocking a game and going to the next level. It's
Mhm.
like, right, tick. All right, now we can start implementing there. When you mentioned there about the coach's eye, what is it you're looking for? Do you have a checklist that you use? Do you have like set standards that they need to hit before then?
So there's two main ones, and then like a sub one that sometimes comes into play, but it's never a good thing when it does. So the two main ones is relative strength and absolute strength. So even if someone's only lifting 100 kilos, if they weigh 45 kilos, all of a sudden that's a lot of load for the frame that they're lifting with. So it may maybe not seem like a huge absolute load, but relative to that individual, they're now getting to be very strong,
Yeah.
depending on what your standards are. And then absolute loads, even if someone's huge, say you're dealing with a 200, 200 kilo, you're dealing with Hathor Bjornsson. So even if he's only squatting double body weight, it's still a lot of weight, no matter
Yeah.
what. Like there's no working around that. So absolute loads play a huge part as well. Then the final thing is just recoverability. So if someone is no longer recovering and progressing, they're either they're not doing something right on the back end for sleep, nutrition, hydration, preparation, all that there. But it doesn't mean, even if they're not doing something right, we still have to account for it within our programming, because them not doing something right doesn't justify us not getting them the results that they want. Like we have to do something to try and meet them where they're at. We can That thing could be tell them to get better at the outside influences, but it also could be that we're going to manipulate certain factors to help recovery while we're trying to work on those outside factors with them. So at least they're still going to move in a positive direction during that time, get the positive reinforcement they need, and the buy-in to you as a coach so you can really, really get results long term.
Yeah, yeah. I think looking at that, it's that thing of um, using all those using all that information to
Mhm.
make that judgment. And I am a big fan of, especially from the powerlifting and the strength side of things that I've done a lot of is, you know strength is going to be relative, weight is going to be relative, but also, exactly like what you said, how they're recovering from sessions, because all these layers start adding on a little bit compared to a beginner. For example, one bad night's sleep
Yeah.
isn't really going to
No.
impact it too much, because there's probably a lot more control within that situation. The more
Hmm.
advanced you get, yeah, all of a sudden, and just on that topic of the variables outside of it, it's amazing, and you'll know this in Florida as well. Not enough water, and all of a sudden
Oh,
you're like, oh, I'm absolutely wiped out. The
yeah.
one thing that is, when just going back to the kind of like the advanced client and athlete of variety, there's a lot of fads, gimmicks, people trying to do new exercises, trying to combine exercises to make it into a super fantastic best exercise.
Yeah.
How when it comes to variability and challenging, because I think that's the thing, when people are a little bit more advanced, like if they've got to that point, they probably want a challenge,
Mhm.
of seeing what they can do. How many of these gimmicks and fads, would you give them a go? Would it be more of a conversation, or is it a case of just keeping with that bank of exercises, and then just cycling through those, if that makes sense?
I'm extremely basic with my exercise selection until there's a very specific need. Because if there's a very specific need and I'm trying to do something like a really easy example is my shoulder was annoying me in the deep extension, so really end range extension. So I've been doing a bit of a progression just to increase the tissue tolerance there. And my last progression was I've been told it's called an incline Maltese press. So, but basically, I'm I've got rings. I'm standing in front of rings, and I let myself go forward with straight arms till I get into full hyper or full shoulder extension, and then I do a straight arm like front raise on
Yeah,
rings. Would I ever program for that for someone for no reason? Never. Like no point. What is the benefit? It had a very, very specific benefit within my training at a point in time. So
yeah,
then I will get a little funky with things, but oh, to me, the more basic my program looks, the more I know my training's going well.
yeah,
If I'm at my best place in my training, if I walk in and my upper body session has four exercises, my lower body session has three exercises, I know that means everything's going really well. I am not trying to account for any limitations that I'm currently trying to overcome. Whereas if I
yeah,
go in and I see, oh, I've eight exercises for my upper body, I've six exercises for my lower body. I know I am trying to fill in gaps that I've currently found that are holding me back from just going all in on the basics and getting the most out of them. So
yeah.
I'm as basic as I can get away with.
And to me, because even now, I still feel as though when the basics, the fundamentals are discussed, it's kind of maybe not looked down on, but it's a little bit like, oh well, I want something a little bit exciting. Whereas to me, it's as though you're just comfortable with your training, where you're at, where your progress is, what goal you've got. Like, it's just you're comfortable in terms of where you're going. Tying that into, that beginner versus advanced, do you
Mhm.
think that actually, physically, clients and athletes can get to a point where they can do the movement, but maybe their mindset isn't where their movement quality is. So they're looking for, these gimmicks or fads, rather than being like what I said there, of being comfortable with, actually, this is what's working, this is what's going there. I hope that kind of makes sense.
I know, I think I know where you're going. For me, athletes and Gen Pop that go that direction want to do something that looks fun.
Yeah,
Because that's all, at the end of the day, they're looking for something to entertain them. It's not going to be, it might be, have the perception of being hard, but they're not going to wake up the next day like knowing that they have. squat at 400 pounds or whatever. Like it's going to be one, it's the novelty, it's the entertainment side of things. And honestly, I've never really bought into it for anyone. They're they're going to stay with my basic program and they're going to do the basics really well.
Yeah. The thing is though, if that is if that is the case, you know, it works. Do you know what I mean? They're going to end up get those results. Is there a case of and I know you know you mentioned there about your shoulder,
Mhm.
really specific exercise. I hope it helped and worked. Where does specificity um, kind of kind of take over and other things are kind of like move to one side because you know when we're looking at like what you've said there the basics you know movement quality there's movement patterns that we need to tick off because yes you know there might be a whatever sport they do but uh, there's always that phrase of you know they're still a human they still need to be able to do that patterns where does specificity kind of like take over and you know how far do you go with specificity if that makes sense.
So for me, the only people who can really be super specific in the weight room are power lifters and Olympic lifters.
Hmm.
For everyone else, it's GPP.
Yeah.
So there's absolutely no need to be super specific. There's none. Like for anyone else, training a wide variety of exercises and being very efficient in a variety of exercises is going to be the most beneficial for them. Whereas powerlifters, Olympic lifters, they need to specialize at some stage.
Yeah.
They still, for me, there's still a massive upside for them training a wide variety of exercises for as much of their season as possible. And then as they get close to competition, specialize, go for it, be as hyper specific as you want, right down to where your specific sticking points are, like everything. But the more your off season can be based around just being a more able person to display forces in as many angles and many positions as possible, the higher your upside is in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad you touched on that, especially with the powerlifting and weightlifting side of things, because I think there's a case of that's it. I'm just going to do these three exercises,
Yeah.
whereas maybe at the start that's okay, and I've been there. But actually, you know, the longer you do it for, the more it's a case of actually in an off season, like you want to be doing different movements, you want to be you want to be doing different things, and I think there's sometimes a thought process that people want to attach themselves to certain training protocols, modalities, certain sports, and it's like, oh, well, this is the only thing that I do. Whereas actually, you know, it's that thing of the the more exposures you have to different things, all of a sudden that I always think there's like a consistent baseline for everybody. All of a sudden that line just goes up, that line goes up a little bit. And
Yeah.
the other thing is just building robustness.
Yeah.
Whereas uh, going kind of like full circle to what we were chatting about at the start when you mentioned about you know if a beginner is somebody who is you know 16 for example just first walking into the gym relating it to powerlifting some younger clients are being like, oh, I'm gonna be a powerlifter because I've watched this or this, and then
Yeah.
that's all they do, and then all of a sudden, you know, in terms of their development, they get to like 21 and they're picking up injuries and they're not competing as much and they're not doing anything, and I think that that is something that you know, with a little bit more education or you know guidance in terms of have you just tried doing this, it doesn't have to overhaul the program altogether, but just you know micro doses of things will help with that. What's kind of your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah. And like, so say a 16-year-old comes in and wants to start a powerlifting program, that there's absolutely no benefit of them being hyper specific
Mm.
because at that point, like, I'm guessing they're not going to say they weigh 60 kilos. I'm guessing as a power lifter, they hope to not to weigh 60 kilos in 3 years' time. Like, because at the end of the day, like a larger amount of cross-sectional area has a higher potential for force production. As simple as that. But once you add a significant amount of muscle, and anyone who has added a significant amount of muscle will know, your movement patterns change. So
Yeah,
that movement pattern you're locking in since you're 16, add 10 kilos of muscle, it's going to look different. You're going to have a different stance in your squat, have a different stance in your deadlift. So now have a different stance in your deadlift. Now you need a different arm position. So you have to be a little wider. So you're not no longer as your arms are no longer as long. So all of a sudden you're having to lift the barbell further. Like everything changes. So the more your body proportion changes over the years, which in the end of the day, the goal of training is to get stronger and add muscle.
yeah,
The benefit of being hyper specific just isn't there until like if you're super well developed and you know you're not putting on any more muscle, cool. I still think there's benefit for robustness, like you brought up earlier. I think the ability to just train different movement patterns, and it doesn't have to be very different. Like it's like instead of only low bar, wide stance back squat to to power lift and depth, we're also going to do a high bar, full depth. We're going to do a front squat. So we're going to train these joints and angles through slightly longer range of motion, have slightly different torsional angles, so our bracing ability is a bit better. There's more tension through the abdominals. Like we're going to have just a more robust body. So whenever you get out of shape and when you're lifting maximal loads, you're going to get out of shape.
yeah,
You're going to be more robust, so you're maybe not going to get injured. And
yeah,
it's always a maybe. Like you can never say
yeah.
you're not going to get injured, but you're got a hell of a lot better chance than someone who's only ever done one movement pattern for the last 3 years. And if they vary it by a quarter of an inch, they're going to blow in a doctor.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny as you were speaking there. I remember the last competition that I handled at, and there was a lad doing his first powerlifting competition, and I got chatting with him, and because he did really well. He did gymnastics and he also played football. And he's just kind of and you'll know going back to kind of that coaching eye, his just body awareness of what he was doing was just so good.
Yep.
And it's kind of that thing of, he actually got into powerlifting just because he couldn't commit to doing, there was like a point for gymnastics where he just wasn't going to get to the next level. So it's kind of like, do I stick it out for enjoyment or do I do something else? Obviously, went into the gym, we went from there. And I think that's a good way to think about it, focus on all those different movements and then trim it down to where to where you need to be. I think quite a lot of topics and tangents thrown in there today, but I think some really useful content for everyone listening. But the last question that I like to ask is, from everything that we've chatted about today, what would be your take home points or words of wisdom for everyone listening?
Oof, okay. Start with the core principles, like understand the scientific principles behind strength and conditioning. You'll be able to decipher why any program works or why it doesn't work. And then from there, um, even if it's boring, consistency for novices is going to be their quickest way to results, and variety for advanced, while it'll slow down their perception of progression, is going to have allow for longer progression in the long run because they're not going to pick up the niggles. They're going to have better recovery from session to session, and meso to meso, macro to macro. So it's just going to allow for a longer runway that they don't need a deload every second week because they're constantly getting pounded by the same movement patterns. And that could be variations in exercise selection, loadability, intensities, volume. Like choose your poison. But
Yeah.
variations huge once you get to that stage.
Yeah, and I think from there as well. So a good take on point, and a couple of times you mentioned it there. What's going to allow them to progress. I think that's the key thing, because anyone who walks into a gym, starts working with a coach. They're there because they want to progress. They want to move forward. Thanks a lot, Porrick, for taking the time to jump on. Really, really enjoyed chatting with you today.
Thanks
If
for having
anyone
me.
No problem at all. If anyone has any questions about what we've
Mhm.
chatted about today, want to reach out to you or see the content that you put out there, where could people find you or reach out to you?
Easiest way is Instagram. So it's Pauric.O'Rourke at Instagram, I'm guessing. Um, then, or my email's Pauric at kilostrengthsociety.com. So
Nice.
either of those are good.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Like I say, I think some really good information, some good content in there. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.